Today's fairy tale I'm gonna read you is called Strong Hans. A man and a woman and their one child lived quite alone in a remote valley. One day, the mother went into the forest to gather fir tree branches and took little Hans, who was just 2 years old. It was spring. The child was enjoying the flowers, and they wandered further on. Suddenly, 2 robbers sprang out of the thicket, seized the mother and the child, and carried them far away into the black forest, where no one ever went. The woman begged the robbers to set them free, but their hearts were made of stone. They would not listen to her prayers and pleading, and forced her to keep walking. After they had worked their way through bushes and briars, they came to a rock with a door in it. The robbers knocked, and it opened at once. They went through a long, dark passage to an underground cave, and on the wall hung swords, sabers, and other deadly weapons gleaming in the light, and in the middle stood a black table at which 4 other robbers were sitting, gambling, and the captain who sat at the head of it. He came and spoke to the woman, telling her not to fear, they wouldn't hurt her, but she must look after the housekeeping, and if she kept everything in order, she would not suffer. They gave her something to eat and showed her a bed where she and Hans could sleep. The woman stayed many years with the robbers, and Hans grew tall and strong. His mother told him stories and taught him to read an old book of tales about knights that she found in the cave. When Hans was 9 years old, he made himself a strong club out of a branch of fir and hid it behind the bed. He went to his mother and said, "Dear mother, please tell me who my father is. I must and will know." His mother would not tell him, because she didn't want him to long for their former home. She knew that the godless robbers would not let him leave, and it almost broke her heart that Hans could not know his father. In the night, when the robbers came home from their robbing expedition, Hans brought out his club, stood before the captain and said, "I now wish to know who my father is, and if you do not tell me, I will strike you down." The captain laughed and gave Hans such a blow on the ear that he rolled under the table. Hans got up again, held his tongue, and thought, "I will wait another year, and then I try again." When the year was over, he brought out his club once more, rubbed the dust off it, and said, "It is a stout, strong club." At night, the robbers came home and set about drinking 1 jug of wine after another, and their heads began to be heavy. Then Hans brought out his club, stood before the captain, and asked once more who his father was. The captain again gave him such a vigorous blow on the ear that Hans rolled under the table. But this time he jumped up again and beat the captain and the robbers with his club until they could no longer move their arms or legs. His mother stood in a corner of admiration for his bravery and strength. When Hans was finished with the robbers, he said to his mother, "Now I have shown that I'm serious. I must know who my father is." "Dear Hans," answered his mother, "come, we will seek until we find him." She took the key to the door from the captain, and Hans packed a sack with gold and silver. They left the cave for the first time since Hans was just 2 years old. How his eyes opened when he came out of the darkness into daylight and saw the green forest and the flowers and the birds and the morning sun in the sky. He stood there and wondered at everything. His mother found the right way home, and when they had walked for a long while, they got safely into their lonely valley and to their little house. Hans' father was sitting in the doorway. He wept for joy when he recognized his wife and realized Hans was his boy, because he had thought they were dead. Hans, though young, was a head taller than his father. They went inside together, but when Hans put his sack of gold and silver on the bench by the stove, the whole house began to crack. The bench broke, and then the floor, and the heavy sack fell through into the cellar.
"God save us!" cried the father. "Our little house is broken to pieces."
"Don't be worried, dear father," answered Hans. "That sack holds far more than what we'd need for a new house." Hans and his father began to build a new house, to buy cattle and land, and to keep a farm. Hans plowed the fields, and he was so strong that when he pushed the plow, the bullocks had scarcely any need to pull. The next spring, Hans said to his parents, "Keep all the gold and silver, but order me a walking stick that weighs 100 tons, and I will go traveling." When the stick was ready, he left his parents and went forth into the world. When he came to a deep, dark forest, he heard something crunching and cracking. Looking about, he saw a fir tree that was wound round like a rope from the bottom to the top. A great fellow was twisting it like a willow twig.
"Hello!" cried Hans. "What are you doing there?"
The man replied,
"I chopped some firewood yesterday, and now I'm twisting a rope to tie it up."
"Excellent," thought Hans. "How strong he is." He called to him,
"Leave that alone and come with me."
The fellow came down. He was a whole head taller than Hans, and Hans was not little.
"Your name is now Fear Twister," said Hans.
They went on together until they heard something knocking and hammering with such force that the ground shook at every stroke. A giant was striking great pieces of a mighty rock with his fist. When Hans asked what he was doing, he answered, "At night, bears, wolves, and other vermin come and snuffle about me and won't let me rest. So I want to build myself a house with these rocks." Hans thought, I can make use of this one also. He said, "Leave your house building and come with me. You shall be called Rock Splitter." The man consented, and all three strong men roamed through the forest. Wherever they went, the wild beasts were terrified. One evening they came to an old deserted castle, and they slept in the great hall. They arranged that each day, taking turns, 2 of them would go out hunting, and 1 would stay at home and cook their meat. Fear Twister stayed at home the next day. Hans and Rock Splitter went out hunting. When Fear Twister was busy cooking, a shriveled-up little man came to him in the castle and asked for some meat.
"Be off, you sneaking imp," he answered. "You need no meat."
To his astonishment, the shriveled-up dwarf sprang at him and hit at him so hard that he could not defend himself, but fell on the ground and gasped for breath. The violent little man kept beating Fear Twister until he had thoroughly vented his anger. When the 2 others came home from hunting, humiliated Fear Twister said nothing to them, thinking, "Let's see how they get on with the imp when they stay at home." The next day, Rock Splitter stayed home to cook, and he fared just as Fear Twister had done, being very ill-treated by the dwarf because he didn't give him any meat. When the others came home in the evening, Fear Twister saw clearly what Rock Splitter had suffered, but neither said anything. They were thinking, Hans must also have his share of this. Hans stayed home the next day and did his work in the kitchen. As he was standing skimming the pan, the little old man came and without introduction demanded a piece of meat. Hans thought, "He is a poor wretch. I will give him some of my share, then the others will still have theirs," and handed him a bit. When the little man had devoured it, he again asked for some meat, and good-natured Hans gave it to him, telling him it was a handsome piece and that he was to be content with it. But the dwarf ate it and then begged again a third time. "You are shameless," said Hans, and gave him nothing. Then the malicious dwarf wanted to spring on him and beat him as he had beaten Fear Twister and Rock Splitter. He had chosen the wrong man. Hans, without exerting himself much, gave the little dwarf a couple of blows which made him jump down the castle steps. Hans was about to run after him, but fell flat on his face. By the time he stood up again, the little man had got away from him. Hans hurried after into the forest and saw him slip into a hole in the rock. Hans went home, but he had marked the spot. When the two other strong men came back from hunting, they were surprised that Hans was so well. He told them what had happened, and then they no longer concealed what had happened on their days at home. Hans laughed and said, "It served you quite right. Why were you so mean with your meat? It is a disgrace that you, who are so big, should have let yourself be beaten by that little imp of a man." Then they took a basket and a rope and went to the hole in the rock where the little man had run, and let Hans down in the basket, holding his club. When Hans reached the bottom, he found a door, and when he opened it, a girl was sitting there, who was so beautiful that no words could express it. By her side sat the shriveled little man, who grinned at Hans like a cat. The girl was bound with chains and looked so mournful that Hans felt great pity for her and was determined to help her escape. He swung his club, giving the wicked little man such a blow that he fell down dead. Immediately, the girl's chains fell away, and Hans was enraptured with her beauty. She told him she was a king's daughter. A savage count had stolen her away from her home and imprisoned her there among the rocks, because she would not speak to him. The count had set the dwarf as a watchman, and she had suffered terrible misery. Hans placed the girl in the basket and had her drawn up. The basket came down again, but Hans did not trust his two companions, thinking, "They have already shown themselves to be false, and told me nothing about the shriveled little man. Who knows what design they may have against me?" So he put his club in the basket instead of getting in himself, and it was lucky he did, for when the basket was halfway up, they let it fall again. If Hans had been in it, he would have been killed. Now he did not know how he was going to get out of the hole in the rock, and turning it over repeatedly in his mind, he could not come up with an answer. "Ah, it is indeed sad," said he to himself, "that I will have to waste away down here." But as he was walking about despairing, he wandered into the chamber where the girl had been sitting, and saw that a dead little man had a ring on his finger that shone and sparkled. He pulled it off and placed it on his own finger. Then, when he turned it round, he suddenly heard something rustle above his head. He looked up and saw spirits of the air hovering over him. They told him he was their master, asked what they could do for him. Hans was at first struck dumb, but then, recovering his wits, asked them to carry him up out of the rock hole. They obeyed instantly, and it felt just as if he had flown up. When Hans emerged back into the open air of the forest, though, he found no one in sight. Fear Twister and Rock Splitter had hurried away and taken the beautiful girl with them. Hans turned the ring, and the spirits of the air came and told him that the two were on the sea. Hans ran to the shore, and there, far, far out on the water, he could see a little boat in which his disloyal friends were sitting. In fierce anger, without thinking about what he was doing, he leaped, club in hand, into the water and began to swim. But the club, which weighed 100 tons, dragged him deeper until he was nearly drowned. In the nick of time he turned his ring, and the spirits of the air came and bore him as swift as lightning into the boat. He swung his club and gave his wicked comrades what they deserved, throwing them into the water. Then he sailed with the beautiful girl who had been very frightened, who he had now saved twice, home to her father and mother. He married her, and all rejoiced greatly.